back online. So Anand, I
Yes,
will help you with your slides.
thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Rick. You really set the tone for our conversation today. What I wanted to do is really build a little bit on what Rick said in terms of some of the key considerations that comes into play when you look at the digital transformations of today. But before that, I just want to step back a little bit to give you a little perspective of the kind of path that we have traversed. So when I look back a little bit at the start of the millennium, a lot of our focus was primarily on technology, and really it was about systems consolidation, systems modernization, and the level of person or the leader that we were dealing with was a technology leader in an organization, and it was kind of the business IT, if I may call that. Slowly I think we got into the mobility part, and so it was really about getting the functionality and the features manifested in a mobile device. But it was still complex because you had to develop separately for Android and separately for iPhone and so on and so forth. So technology was always a little bit of constraint as we started our journey in the early 2000s, and then we moved from mobility to SMAC, and that's where I think there was a little bit of a leapfrogging that was starting to happen, because cloud from that point on really took off, and the whole focus was around data. The whole focus was around looking at how do you create speed, how do you create provisioning faster so that you don't have to wait a lot of time for procurement, and therefore you're able to really put up the functionality fast enough. We then expanded it to the different service models, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and so on, which also squeezed the implementation timelines. So in a sense, we were starting to address the speed to market. So the business perspective was starting to come in, and cloud in a sense was a key enabler, and the conversation was almost happening at the CIO level. And from that point on, really technology was always ahead, and it was really about what is the business model, who are your customers, and what does value mean. And today when we look at what we're talking about, the whole focus is around business value. The conversation, the agenda, the charter is at the CEO level, and it's also about providing an end-to-end accountability in a very complex ecosystem where the boundaries are blurred. You look at the value chain, it pretty much starts from suppliers who are outside the boundaries of our traditional organization to really the client, and then the client's customers who are again outside of the boundaries. So how do you really look at it from an end-to-end perspective and be in a position to deliver value? So that's really the sort of transformation or transition that we have taken. I think the good news for us is a lot of work that we have done so far are good platforms for us to take this sort of journey forward. Dimitri, if I can move to the next slide.
Absolutely. And I would welcome everybody to, if there are any questions, or
Questions?
please post them in the question bar. So here you go, Anand.
Yeah. So as you can see, I think the whole intent of this slide was to convey to you that it is a complex landscape. As you look at it, the stakeholder world has become complex. You have stakeholders who are outside what might have been considered the traditional boundary, but really, I think today the ecosystem itself is expanded. So you have people that come from an upstream perspective. There are suppliers whose systems, whose technology, whose mindsets, whose culture may be very different than the core organization which is really serving its customers. So you almost have to look at it from end-to-end perspective, and look at the different roles that are in play as well. The traditional enterprise architects who sort of, I think, look at it from an overall architecture technology standpoint, to people who have to now look at it as a product versus a project. How do you really look at portfolios and products, and what is the value that needs to be delivered, and what is the service model for the life cycle of the product itself? So it is not just about building it and deploying it, but it is also about supporting the product through its life cycle to create the kind of experience that we want for our customers and generating value. So as you can see, my intent was not really to go through every piece, but it hopefully conveys a message that it is starting to become more and more complex. And the intent, when you go through the digital transformation of today, it's really sifting through those layers, sifting through those complexities, and being able to establish a clarity and a roadmap for us to move forward. So what really I want to project then is, what does the roadmap look like, or what are the key dimensions that we need to really address as we move forward? So Dimitri, if we can move into the next slide.
Yes, absolutely. So before we do, Anand, we have a very interesting question from Mandiam.
Okay.
And the question is actually, and I don't know if it fits here because we will be addressing that as well. It's about the leaders and the leadership. And the question is, I mean, how can we expect them to be business centric, in this digital space, and how much business centricity should be combined with, so to say, technology, let's say pure technical knowledge? And what is actually the balance between business side and also having a technology understanding? So because they also be technical and a little bit of hybrid. I mean, I don't know if we can park it somewhere else, but I think it is an important question to
I will
address.
just quickly allude to that, and then we can move forward and then come back and answer it. So really, I think it's a great question. And part of my intent of giving you the journey was to give you the appreciation that technology is foundational. It is important. The good news for us is, I think technology is starting to be the leading indicator or the leading aspect of where we can go. And technology expertise is absolutely critical. However, as you saw, in fact, we've almost spoken about digital being in the charter of the CEO himself or herself, which means the business leaders have to be part of this journey as well. You need to understand who are your customers, what is your market, what does value mean in the context of that customers, and therefore leveraging all of that technology, what sort of service delivery model do you need to have, what sort of pricing model you need to have, and what does speed and agility mean to them. So it is a combination of the business leaders and technology leaders coming together. In fact, these days, a CIO actually gets measured on business metrics. They don't get measured on the traditional IT metrics. So it is extremely important to have business centricity combined with a very strong technology base as well. So with that, let me just keep moving forward. And here is, I think, a slide that I really enjoy, and it probably depicts multiple messages. But my point here is, we can look at technology, and as I mentioned, technology today depicts the art of the possible. You look at tooling, you look at automation, you look at the CI/CD, all of that collectively put together, we can create a Lamborghini. The point is, once you have a high-performing car, do you have the roads to really steer it and navigate it through? Which is the time you really get that experience of having been in a Lamborghini, right? There isn't much fun sitting in a Lamborghini that's parked. So the idea is, how do you now start looking at the ecosystem? How do you look at the enablers that are in and around that core, so that the core engine that we have built can really move fast, build that speed and agility, and enable us to deliver the business value? So really, it's about moving the sheep out of the way so that we can really move fast. If I can move to the next slide.
Absolutely, thanks.
Thank you. So in fact, Rick referenced a certain slide which spoke about the successes of the smaller percentage of success, which is about 16%, surprisingly. And so we want to look at, what does it take to get to that 16%? What makes those 16% more successful than others? I would say there are three factors, and it's really almost reiterating the messages that Rick has already spoken about. The first one is the underpinnings of the culture that we build within the organization. The culture has to necessarily change. We've had silos, we've had the dev organization, we have the ops organization, we have looked at businesses being different, we have looked at players outside of our own organization separate. You're having to look at all of them as part of this one big family. And so the mindset changes, a culture of collaboration has to be built, and we'll spend more time on what it means. You have to have an organization structure that's more conducive. Rick again referenced the level of autonomy, and how do you build the structure in a manner that there is adequate autonomy at the level at which the teams are operating. They shouldn't have to look upward and waste time. So therefore, we need to build the structure that's conducive for that. And you also need the necessary processes that will enable them to deliver to that value. So I would really look at the three elements: culture, structure, process, and of course, technology being the foundation. And I'm almost taking it for granted I'm almost saying the Lamborghini is already there. How do we really drive it, navigate it to be able to get that high performance? And so it's really interesting. From this point on, you're going to hear the various facets being delved into a little bit. So now I'm going to request Nivarti to speak a little bit more about this business centricity. What does business centric DevOps means? How do you really get to that from a tech centric in terms of the metrics, in terms of the KPIs, in terms of some of the underlying ecosystem enablers? So over to you, Nivarti, for that.
So before we do it, Nivarti, can I do a brief, some brief messages as well? So first of all, during this session, the first 30, 40 minutes, we're still seeing an increase in attendees. So for all of you who joined us in the last 15 minutes, welcome on board. We did start. For all of you, you will get the presentation and the recording of the session. So don't worry if you missed the beginning. So we will share it with all of you. We had another interesting question from Sundeep Undale. He said, listen, I'm fairly new to the DevOps domain. I hear you talking about DASA DevOps fundamentals. Can you, during the session, also address a little bit for newbies as well? So, I mean, for all the speakers today, also try to give a little bit of perspective on, what we typically tend to cover and how the first step on your learning journey looks like. And before I move to Nivarti, I would like to raise a new poll as well, and then I suggest you take over. And the next poll, let me see, is about a DASA DevOps meetup. Did you attend a DASA DevOps meetup before? So please, let's take just a couple of sessions, because it is interesting for us to see how many return visitors we have. And we have 60% voted, so we're moving fast, And it's quite interesting for me, 65. I'll give you 10 seconds, 10, 9, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Let me close the poll over here. So 1 second and we'll, so I think it's an interesting one. I'm actually very satisfied by this result, because 60%, about 1/6 of the audience, I mean, did visit one of our meetups before, but we were also able to engage with a new audience as well, which is actually a fantastic news. So with that, Nivarti, can you take